have I had a very nice presentation and a very nice abstract about transcultural psychiatry. And I remember that I wrote a chapter in the textbook of cultural psychiatry, psychotherapy across cultures. And I'm going to sum up this part. So, when I'm looking at the culture and the psychiatric disorders, I can say multi-dimensional interaction. We have the underlying pathology and symptoms, and contributes to the understanding of those. And while in the East cultures, we have somatic approaches. In the West cultures, we have more cultural concepts. For example, in the Inuit culture, Canadian culture, we don't have any words for depression. And why in the English-speaking societies, we have the depression word. And why in India, uh, people are defining this as the laws of their own, or so those are different areas of psychopathology. If we have to sum up those areas, that are pathogenicity and pathoplasticity, and they can differentiate and change this. So it is all also a cultural thing, and the culture itself may lead to something like that. In Cambodia, this is a very common syndrome. And the anxiety symptoms or dissociative disorder. Dissociative disorder symptoms may be described by the line of their blood. So the culture helps us to understand something, and also it has a protective function. Some of the culture are more social centric.
So, as isolated beings, we do not exist. We born into families, and we have intensive relations with our families until the day we die. And with the help of modernization, right now this notion is being changed, but most of the time, family dynamics are playing an important role in the shaping of such dynamics. And some people very frequently, since they cannot break down the ties with their families, they get into conflict with their families, interplay in quotation marks. Symptoms may emerge. And this tight relationship with the family sometimes give harm to the people. And for therapeutic communication, we need communication. We need to understand communication, the language of the person that is in front of us. The person that we're seeing gives us certain cues, such as silence or looks, certain looks, gazes. Therefore, we have to pay attention to verbal, both verbal and non-verbal communication cues. And in non-Western communities, such as Africa, for instance, communication is not solely verbal. There are non-verbal cues that we need to pay attention to in order to understand our patients in the best way possible. Here, we require culture. And the differences, cultural differences in communication, there can be some cultural differences in communication. So when it comes to verbal communication, our way of exposing ourselves, expressing ourselves can be different. Some people can be more verbal and some people can be more discreet. Some people can explain themselves in a more intensive manner. And some people have walls built around them and they do not allow many people inside. Especially some shameful issues, shame inducing issues such as sexuality or close relations. Some clients do not want to expose themselves. Therefore, we need to be very careful while we are trying to cross this threshold. Verbal traditions give importance to the context. Without a context, it will be very difficult for you to understand the people. Nonverbal communication, body language can be different as well. As for a Japanese person, looking into the eye can be considered as aggressive. Japanese people, most of the time, look at the throat of their counterpart. According to the general literature, there can be some exceptions. But most of the time, they look at the throat of their counterparts, which shows respect. But when it comes to a North American, not looking into the eye of your counterpart can be considered as bad, and they can be suspicious of any inside business or corruption. So making an eye contact can be interpreted differently from one culture to another. So the activity that we call psychotherapy means that two people are in a structured communication. They're talking openly about their emotions, and one person is more vulnerable than the other one. Meeting of such two people, and in some cultures, there are certain suggestions that are not overt. And exposing individualism is evident in some cultures based on Protestant values, exposing self-identifying individualism indicates that a person is only responsible for himself or herself and needs to be isolated from the community and takes on the responsibility of his or her own life according to this approach. So the members of such a community are not very open about their emotions. The feeling of psychological well-being is something that needs to be achieved. And happiness is an end goal, an ideal for people to reach. And it doesn't worth to suffer in this world. When you witness any type of agony, you have to run away from it, according to some philosophers, Western philosophers. As a result, happiness, according to the Constitution of the United States, is something that you need to pursue. Finally, one of the propositions of psychotherapy, cultural psychotherapy, and also one of the main aphorisms of the Western culture is the following. A human being can seize the nature and can dominate the nature. A human being can only be illuminated once this person dominates over the nature and domesticate the nature. Once a person domesticates the nature, this person will also have power over himself or herself. And the whole psychotherapy approach is founded upon this belief, according to some resources. Here, there are two contradicting perspectives. In the first one, the agony of life is not accepted, and there's struggle against pain, and at whatever cost it is, happiness should be pursued. And in the second perspective, life should be embraced with both pain and joy, based on will, personal will, according to this perspective. And we witness the same approaches in the psychotherapies that we implement. For instance, sadness in the Eastern cultures is considered as a component of their spiritual being. When you take a look at the Anatolian cultures, you will see a huge amount of pain and agony and sadness. For centuries, people try to express their sadness and pain with traditional folk songs. And when you take a look at the Balkan songs, and dear professor, you will also agree with me, you will see that their songs, their traditional folk songs, are more joyful. But on the other hand, in the Anatolian culture, the songs, folk songs, are more sad. Therefore, there can be different perspective regarding the look towards life, perspective towards life. There are also certain differences regarding individual perceptions. Western rules dictate us that individual freedom needs to overcome community, and a person's own responsibility is more important. And the definition of ethical behavior changes from one culture to another. Regarding what healthy norms can be, there are very different perceptions and definitions, changing from one culture to another. When we say healthy norm, actually, we are opening a discussion, naturally. For instance, when I ask you, is it healthy for one person to give away to the rest of the society or not, or to be oversharing from the Protestant ethics point of view, would it be healthy? Or, according to this belief, everyone is responsible for himself or herself and needs to pursue the life goal. And would it be appropriate, according to this culture, to be oversharing? In the Western countries, when you look at their history, starting from their notion of the right person, we are trying to shape our psychotherapy trajectory. Therefore, in my book titled Therapy as a Cultural Analysis, I tried to define this problem. I tried to analyze this situation. As a matter of fact, many psychotherapy theories are based on the Jadid stories in the Bible. It's like rewriting of the stories in the Bible. So our theories are impacted by mythology. The ideals in the minds of the people are reflected upon our understanding. Within the cultural psychiatry, another important component is the cultural competence. A person should be alert to himself or herself, and we need to be conscious of what we are advocating. When the person, our counterpart starts talking, when do we interrupt this person, and when do we pay closer attention to this person, and when do we neglect this person? When the opinion of our counterpart doesn't correspond with ours, how do we behave? How do we conduct ourselves? All such instances can be analyzed only through cultural awareness. So cultural information, from where does your counterpart come? And the community in which this person is living, what are the pains that this person has been exposed to within the community that this person is living in, without biases. If you want to listen to the person in front of us without any biases, we should be aware of their cultural background and cultural competence. In our therapeutic methods, we try to adopt culturally sensitive methods in order to have a broader understanding of culture. So cultural humility is also a very important concept of transcultural psychiatry. It means that we should be open-minded and we should be ready to discover ourselves. For the last decade, intellectual humility, the definition of intellectual humility has come to the forefront in the social sciences. Intellectual humility means approaching any kind of incident with the mindset of a starter. Because as we move on in our journey of learning, we start to realize that our knowledge is not sufficient, is never sufficient. And when a client comes to us, we shouldn't approach this person based on the ethnic background or religious background of this person. We should be open-minded. Therefore, we should be aware of both our own biases and the biases of the client. So let's say in my ethnical identity, let's say I saw something in the West, in Netherlands, a client, and let's say our backgrounds are in compliance and there are certain advantages to that. For instance, language. There is no language barrier. We can communicate. We can understand each other and our cultural traditions. Maybe at the beginning, there will be a therapeutic cooperation. And thanks to the cultural common ground, we will move forward very fast, but there will be some disadvantages as well. And such disadvantages can hamper the therapeutic process. For instance, can lead to over-identification. And the clinician can be considered, in quotation marks, as a friend from the same neighborhood. Or Turks are like that, or Dutch people are like those. Such stigmas may emerge. Individualism in psychotherapy, so where does it take us to? To which conundrum? So we give more importance to the internal world and we disregard the outer world. This is one of the dilemmas, one of the conundrums that is waiting for us when our psychotherapy is based on individualism as a narrative. The idea that a person needs to understand the self, this is a narrative dates back to about 200 years ago. So There can be a handicap such as forcing the person, the client, to come and see us. So regarding productivity, taking productivity as the only measurement can take us to a conundrum, to a dead end. A person's individuality in the invisible world, a person's being beyond the borders of this world may not be understood by the psychiatrists. But when we take a look at more religion-based communities, more religious, more belief-based societies, we will see that people are more have more closer relationship with their deeper identities. Well, these are very basic information, actually. European and American societies have more autonomous and individualistic members, and in many other cultures we see more inclusive communities, independent and dependent identities which reflect upon psychotherapy. So, in different societies and different cultures, people are made of their relationships, and relationships are the most defining elements of their identities. For instance, in the Japanese culture, people give importance to the social harmony, and every time they break the harmony, for instance, Taijin Kuyo Fusho, the incident that I mentioned earlier, is considered as a social phobia. But here, at this point, the person is not disturbed by the looks of others. This person is worried about disturbing other people by looking at them, staring at them, and which brings it into a psychopathological range. One of the elements related with our community, Turkish community, is the impact of bodily disturbances, the role of bodily disturbances in the expression of psychiatric disorders. Distress, the concept of distress, is expressed in bodily functions in our culture. For instance, when we say we're anxious, we use an analogy of a bird. We say that my heart acts like a bird and spreads its wings and tries to fly. Actually, this is an analogy which shows that the heart is induced by psychological responses. In the South Asian, in South Asia, or in Iran, Byron Good made a very classical study in the 1970s. Narahat Kalp is a concept that they use to express anxiety. Narahat Kalp. Actually, it is understandable in Turkish as well because na is the prefix, negative prefix, while heart means, kalp means heart. Bottom line, they are trying to express a psychological problem by referring to the heart, to the state of heart. So, according to the literature, in the non-Western or Eastern cultures, family always needs to be involved in the therapeutic process. family needs to be at the epicenter all the time. There can be some indirect communication or social support system within the family.
Bana çarşı
There was a family who visited me from Charshamba district of Samsun, and they said that when there's a great problem in the family, we solve it as follows. If we cannot proceed, if we cannot find a solution early, the men go out of the house. They do shopping to make some food, and the women go into the kitchen from the morning to the evening. They cook meals, and a great fast is prepared. And nobody talks about the problem. Everyone eats and relax, and most of the time, that problem is becoming invisible after that dinner, after that fast. And it was quite interesting because they were solving that conflict with a dinner. So each society has their own unique ways to solve the problems. The understanding the perspective of the patient, we need to understand them, and also our perspective must be closer to theirs because we do not have the superiority to look from another level. At the same level we must be, we try to understand what they're telling us. And the culture is a dynamic phenomenon. We need to handle it like this. Today we talk about globalization and local cultures in different manners. These are consumed. They call it localization and creolization. Each local culture consumes the globalization in different manners, and there is also a hybridization, a mix, is valid for all the cultures, and the identities are mixed. Psychotherapy is a manner of cultural healing because there's a therapeutic relationship. There is in a different contexts from the daily life. This has some rules to structure, and there are some concepts regarding recovery. And self is also a cultural product, a cultural building, because self is shaped in a different manner in different cultures, and rather than a global self concept, there are local selves. Each self has its own social context and traces of it, and we need to think about all these. And ethnocentric thoughts which penetrated into psychotherapeutic concepts must be well aware of because Anglo American values shape many things. Individualism and its logic of controlling the whole nature can sometimes be the foundation of the thoughts. We need to be aware of this. And for a cultural sensitivity, we need to criticize ourselves first. We need to criticize our theories, and we need to be aware of the ethnocentric biases, and we need to hear the voices of the therapist and the patient, and they must be equal. No one shall surpass one another. Therefore, the two must feel that they understand each other. This is the safe haven. A safe environment must be provided. And to the extent possible, we need to understand the cultural stance of the person. We shouldn't judge and take all this into evaluation. And with that, thank you very much for your attention.